Good evening to the audience here at the Hennage Auditorium, and also to those of you who are joining us virtually for this evening with the presidents. It is an opportunity for us to learn about the past and to use that information to inform our present and our future. My name is Barbara Hamm Lee, and I am the executive producer and host of Another View, which is heard every Thursday at noon on your NPR station for Eastern Virginia, 89.5 WHRV FM. It is truly my pleasure to serve as your moderator this evening. Presidents George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. We all learned about them in school, but how well do we really know them? What were their private thoughts about this new way of governing? What were their biggest fears about democracy? And how shocked are they going to be when they see who's interviewing them this evening? Let's find out. Ladies and gentlemen, the first president of the United States, President George Washington.
People talking. Having a clothing emergency.
Please welcome to the stage the principal author of the Declaration of Independence and the third president of the United States, President Thomas Jefferson. He's referred to as the father of the Constitution. Please welcome the fourth president of the United States, President James Madison. Good evening, gentlemen. Please be seated.
Good evening.
So, gentlemen, you will be really happy to know that in the year 2022, democracy is alive and thriving. But we almost lost the very essence of democracy, and it was severely tested in 2021 when a group of people who proclaimed to be patriots stormed the Capitol of the United States, determined to stop the peaceful transfer of power from the 45th president to the 46th president. The division of parties is deep, and many lament the loss of civility in our society today. Now, we've been taught that civility is the key pillar, or one of the key pillars, to success of democracy. So my question to you is, how did you deal with divisive issues and yet maintain civility? Were there backroom brawls that we don't know about that you presented as a united front to the rest of the people? I think I will start this evening with President Washington.
I was going to begin by mentioning that it isn't also common that we see civility lost when entering into political argument. But truth is, when I was very young, just after the war, back when France was our enemy and England our friend, I stood for election in, well, what is now Winchester. And a gentleman became so upset with me that he came upon me in the street, completely unexpected by me, and punched me in the face. So hard that he knocked me on the ground. Now, in those days, I was in my 20s. I was much younger and fitter than I am now, and certainly not used to being attacked on the street, and certainly not used to being attacked successfully in the street. The next day, I approached the gentleman, and I apologized that I had made some action that caused him to lose his passion and to hit me to the ground.
Wow, that's incredible civility. Maybe not happening here in 2022, sir. Mr. Jefferson.
It's a strange word, civility. somewhat covers all manner of sins, does it not? You can reach across the aisle with great civility and yet hold great sin for the man across whom the aisle you reach. We've seen such in this country, you know. Men who reach across the aisle with smiles in their mouths and honey dripping from their teeth, and yet fangs lie below them. No doubt you do not know this. No doubt your politicians have nothing but great civility before them. No doubt they do not engage in this deep darkness of calling forth their darker angels to betray and demean and deny another human their process and their right and their being. If this is true in your time, it's true in ours, you know? Yes? You might look back and say, what great civility we had here upon this dais. How great these men we are. And if you look back and you say, we could be nothing better, that you could be nothing better than we, then why are you here? Why can't you be better than us? Yes? If you think that there is nothing greater than what has been before, then why are you here? Yes? Oh, what great exuberance. Come, think of this. Is not your time better than 100 years ago? Not perfect, better. Yes? 250 years ago? Yes? What is this but mankind improving over time? Yes? So when you look back and we might say, is there civility in our time? Well, yes, certainly there is. But there is also clearly, as Washington stated, uncivility. So what is the through line then? Men who fall to their darker demons. So what is your prerogative then? I existed. I was elected, and you will find this to great aghast. Please hold your jaws tight to your chins. I understand. Gird your loins. Hold on to your breeches, you gentlemen. Women don't wear breeches. Gentlemen, hold on to your breeches. My election was dirty and dangerous and dreadful, and there was mud thrown through every newspaper across the country. You'll never see this again. There was an election that was attempted to be stolen from me. You'll never see this again. There was the High President at the time, John Adams. Not here. You will never see another president attempt to subvert the will of the people to steal an election from the will of the people. Will you? Because you are civilized. Yes? How greater are you than we? Yes? Oh. Oh, you dear, dear people. If you find yourself drawn to the darker demons that we have found ourselves in our age, with Hamilton, with myself, with federalist and anti-federalism, with partisan politics that attempt to divide a nation because partisanship is better than the nation themselves, then if you think that you're better than that, you should be lost in fiction. You are no better. We are no better. The only way we might be better is from learning from each other. Humans are very strange, you know. We're the only creatures, I think, that portray each other. You go to a theater. You go to a theater and you see men and women pretending to be ourselves. How very strange. Why do we do this? We do this because we might learn something, right? Might we learn something from not just the theater, but from history itself, from our time? So if you think that we are civilized people who never raised hand against one another, let's not look at that great musical Hamilton with Mr. Burr, right? How uncivilized. But might we learn better from it? Yes? So let's be better.
President Madison, was your presidency more civil than perhaps the other two gentlemen?
I know not if I have anything of quality to say. But I'm going to say something anyway. Yes, but not for my own account and labor. When I stood for the office of the presidency, it was said by my opponent, Charles Cotsworth Pinckney, that he would have had an easier time standing against James Madison if he did not stand against James and Dolly Madison. Now, if there is any sufficiency that I have that these two gentlemen, worthy though they may be, lack, it is that I am bestowed with the genius of my wife. Now, we three gentlemen endeavored to navigate to the best of our ability the division of party, but my wife put forward a brilliant notion when the time came to entertain these two factions that daily, with their vitriol and venom, threatened to tear the country apart. And that was to sit these rival factions at the dinner table and to sit next to them their wives. Women are bestowed with far more civility than we men. But upon the greater topic of division, and indeed of civility, I should say we have all walked with this nation every step since its beginnings, since before there was a nation whereby civility was necessary. The elections of our childhood were all local, provincial, county elections, where it was easy to maintain civility because you were standing against your cousin. Everyone in Virginia is related. But we equally watched the rise of an extended American empire, where suddenly the personalities affixed were not those you were acquainted with, whereby your sole acquaintance with them was what was said about them. Public virtue, public vice. And in that vein, we found a greater conundrum of what it is to be a member of one faction or another. And this is the great conundrum of society. Since society was formed, since time immemorial, we have seen factions arise. A difference of opinion, real or supposed, is the most common fruit of them. What are the distinctions betwixt Whig and Tory, if not a difference of faction? What are the crowns of France and England, if not a distinction of faction? And yet in America, we have seen a continent where a multiplicity of factions, natural, have arisen. Those who identify as men of Virginia, of Massachusetts, of New York. We have here assembled the whole population of Rhode Island. And we witnessed in the course of our time how these natural distinctions of faction have held back the progress of government. And yet the faction that I suspect comes to your minds now is that of artificial faction, that of political party. Now, we are acquainted with political party in our time, not solely because of the political parties that have arisen upon America's shore, but how the political system of Great Britain, of Parliament, of Whig and Tory, has stymied the progress of good government and inevitably ceased the end of liberty. And here upon American shores, we have the opportunity to test an experiment where ambition may be made to counteract ambition, where one political party becomes a check to another. For make no mistake, that is the purpose of party, to ensure a system of government may check itself and not overleap the greater barrier to the rights of the people. What then is the value of a people to succumb to political party? Need a people exist to check their fellow citizenry? Perhaps. The great philosopher Montesquieu says, in every society there is a general spirit that moves it, that binds a people together, more than class, more than condition, more than faith, a spirit that moves a nation. The unique quality of our time is we cultivated. What general spirit should pervade in America? And I suspect the greater challenge for posterity should ever be this: which spirit should move the American citizenry? A spirit of unity or a spirit of party? It is a question that I suspect will not be answered in our time, and a question which perhaps will move through to your time as well.
Let me stay with you for just a moment, sir, if I might. When you were developing the Constitution, writing the Constitution, did you think about a backup plan if it didn't work?
Madam Lee, I am an anxious creature. I think of everything. But yes. And first, I will say the Constitution is not solely my work. Though I did not miss a single day of the convention, though the plan of government was the offspring of careful dedication and research to the art of statecraft, there were 55 gentlemen in attendance at the Constitutional Convention. And yet it could be said, a wise, intelligent, and brilliant individual could proffer that perhaps the Constitution is, in and of itself, a backup plan on its own. Our previous system of government, the Articles of Confederation, endeavored to move America through this contest of arms for Great Britain, endured for the better part of 10 years, and where did it lead us? Down the road of anarchy. Under the Articles of Confederation, we witnessed acts of open rebellion like that of Mr. Shays. We witnessed every day a pervading bite of jealousy, of division betwixt the states. We witnessed a national deficit climbing to a cataclysmic tens of millions of dollars. I know. And so upon that, it was the estimation of a great many that this experiment would fail, that it would allow the kings and queens of Europe to rest back upon their throne and once more prove mathematically that man is incapable of governing themselves. I have never been one to confine myself to the opinions of a majority, and I will confess to you, though I am not bestowed of a great many virtues, from the first moments I was capable of contemplating political principles, I've never ceased wishing for the success of a well-regulated Republican experiment of government. And so thankfully, because of the dedication of a true friend in France, I received a literary cargo of hundreds of volumes of human history. This is the value of examining the past. Not so that we might know the ending and find comfort in it, but so that we can study human nature. For man is consistent. If one examines it, our prejudices may change, our fashion. And notice a great many are very radical in their style, Mr. Jefferson. But our interest, our hopes, our inherent goodness, and our inherent vice remains the same. And so through the careful examination of the past, I distilled a singular skeleton, a system of government that may perhaps buy America another 20 years, perhaps. Now, this system of government was hotly debated through the summer of 1787. President Washington will well recall. Upon many instances did that convention almost dissolve itself, and with that, the Union. Upon a great many instances did various provinces threaten to leave the convention and the Union if their interest was not adhered to, and therefore it was a miracle on the 17th day of September when that Constitution was voted in the affirmative, submitted for the states for ratification. And in that we find within this document a particular genius. Within Article 5, the mechanisms whereby it might be amended. Whereby within the edifice of that document, in the edifice of this backup plan, we have caveats for additional backup plans to ensure that the people of America may be a people with revolution in their hearts, but revolutions of words and not blood.
Thank you, sir. All of you have had such responsibility in terms of leading this new republic, of leading this new form of government. I wonder what kept you up at night? What kept you from going to sleep peacefully as you thought about your responsibilities? Mr. Washington.
Mr. Madison spoke of the endless division that we were engaged in just at the time of the ratification of the Constitution. He spoke of its creation. But it didn't end simply when we had agreed to the final draft. It didn't even end entirely with the ratification of the document. And in the first 4 years of my administration, in many ways it increased. We often look back to those halcyon days in '76, when we were of like mind and driven to one purpose. But even then, that occasion was, if it existed at all, only existed briefly. Throughout my administration, we witnessed a number of factions, regional factions. the North against the South and vice versa, the East against the West and vice versa, the wealthy against the poor and vice versa, the farmer against the merchant. And perhaps worst of all of these, the introduction of political parties. The alternating domination of one political party over another, spurred on by the spirit of revenge, will always serve to drive a nation further and further from its better interests and greater counsels. It causes a man not to be a servant to his nation, but nothing more than a servant to a political party. We fought a long and bloody war for 8 years that we might see our rights and liberties defended as a people. It was an outward threat that first drove us into that confederacy, but it shall always be upon our union that our safety and our importance depends. It's long past time that we put behind us our local pursuits, our contracted policies, and our absurd petty jealousies of one another. And we must forego those matters that hold us separate and distinct from one another, and instead learn to embrace those matters that bind us together. We speak the same language. We worship the same God. We enjoy the same political principles and customs. These were amongst the greatest threats to our nation in my 2 terms of office. I relied very strongly on a body of counselors, on my cabinet of secretaries. I was fortunate the first 4 years to have some of the greatest men I might have had at my disposal serve in that purpose. But unfortunately, they did prove disposable. 2 of my most important counselors, after demanding that it was the requirement of honor that I must stand for a second term when it was against my own personal preference, when they said that that was my duty to the country, and that our fledgling political parties would render this nation asunder if I did not, both of them resigned just as the second administration begun. And in no small part, if not entirely, that were the results of party faction.
Mr. Jefferson, what kept you up? What keeps you up at night?
I apologize for leaving the cabinet. I had no... You understand, Mr. Hamilton left me no choice. I could choose nothing else other than to see that we were entirely opposed with one another. And thus being such, we had no proper recompense but to dissolve ourselves from the cabinet, whereby we stood at an impasse and in so entrenched, held your cabinet in some hostage. I do believe the aspect of this entire experiment that brings me the greatest fear is somewhat already spoken of and yet somewhat entirely ancient. And that is that this new government has the ability, the propensity with mankind's fallibility to fall into the same dejected nature whereby we came from. That is monarchy. That this thing that we have proposed, that all of us have stood in fervent advocacy of, this self-representation system of government, is nothing but a phantasm. That it only exists because we believe in it. You know? And if we disbelieve it, if we allow for some greater phantasm, let us say some blood right to step into place of this natural right for us to self-govern, then what is to say that this righteous natural right, regardless of the soil that's beneath our feet or the flag that flies above our head, even exists? It does not. If we allow this thing to be destroyed by monarchy, by monarchism, and let me be assured when I say there are monarchists amongst us. There will be men in your time who wish to hold public office for life. Yes? So what is the only guard against this? If we believe this to be true, if we say that we believe in this republic that utilizes democracy, if we say this is the righteous form of government, and that man has a natural right to choose his own government, then what is the only guard or bulwark we have against blood right or divine right?
Our vote.
Your vote. Well, congratulations, the one man who knows the answer. Thank you, one white gentleman. Please join us here upon this dais. Other white, wealthy gentlemen. If you believe in a step forward for mankind, and I do mean this, if you believe in a step forward for mankind, then you must believe in the step forward for mankind to dash away this old system of monarchy. And I might not be surprised that in 250 years there will still be men who say, I wish to hold this public office for life. And if that doesn't surprise you, then welcome to being human. That's what scares me. We are one generation, I say, one generation away from barbarism. You're the only means. You are the last bulwark, ever. So if you wish to see this thing continue, then you must make sure that it continues. And if you wish to see it end, well, we're all dead.
President Madison, what keeps you up at night?
Madam Lee, if you had asked me 20 years ago, or asked my contemporaries, they would have said Patrick Henry. Would you know, Fisher Ames, a congressman from Massachusetts, when frustrated by my resistance in Congress towards any sense of compromise, and I did resist, I earned the nickname Jimmy the Knife. I hate that nickname. When frustrated by my resistance, he said James Madison was terrified to waking up to the ghost of Patrick Henry at the foot of his bed. That's true. Yeah. But in that there is a greater fear. Not the man himself, but what the man represents. Henry resisted the notion of a federal experiment of government, feared the loss of Virginia's sovereignty, more specifically, Virginia's sovereignty upon a singular decision. A decision which every day becomes more evident and intense to put forward division. I speak, of course, of the masterpiece of circumlocution, which is the right to hold humans in the condition of property and bondage. Now, we three, since before we could consent to own them, have had people prescribed to our name. And I spoke of faction. We see here in this most enlightened age the mere distinction of color, utilization as the most oppressive dominion of man over man. We have all three spoken very pretty words regarding the contradictions that exist, our opposition to the institution, and I will not speak wholly for you two gentlemen, but I, over the course of my life, have viewed it a great necessity and inconvenience to speak out against the institution while simultaneously choosing my own interest as well as the preservation of the Union. Now, it has been our estimation that this institution will, over time, see a slow end, a peaceful end. And yet the evidences throughout the world, revolutions in Saint-Domingue, have revitalized a racial prejudice which every day justifies the institution, to where now the question exists, as we spread from 13 former colonies to 16 present states, how shall the decision of slavery spread to these new provinces? And every day the rallying battle cry that slavery should be the interest by which certain provinces shall participate in this experiment causes me to shudder. We see every day greater division between North and South, a division which moves away from the accommodation of differences and instead towards a call to arms. It is my fear that America will soon be faced with a decision: to draw the sword, to retain their pocketbooks or to lay it down to maintain their principles. That keeps me up at night.
Well, along that same vein, I must ask each of you, what causes you more consternation? The fact that I am Black, or the fact that I am a woman and I am doing the interview? Mr. Jefferson.
Go ahead, Tom.
It's a fascinating question. I believe that perhaps, I have in my past found some consanguinity with intelligent women. And so it might not be perhaps that you are a female, but indeed that you are of your color, interviewing me. In my time, we have some understanding of what it means to be a Negro. And we need not reach too far to understand what science says of the Negro. Science in the Royal Academy in London, the Academy of Science in Berlin, the Academy of Science in Bordeaux, each equally say that we are perhaps individual of our own, meaning we are individual species. What a strange thing it is, science. Does science stay the same? Does science change? Even in your time? Might science change in mine? In ours? There was a gentleman early in my lifetime who had done a dissection of the Negro and the European. He had discovered that there is some fluid called Aethiops, A-E-T-H-I-O-P-S, Aethiops, which it's produced from the pituitary, apparently from the African brain, that produces a demeaning quality upon the brain of the African. I didn't know this, but I learned it from science. Yes? I even learned that the African blood is blue. We know this to be true. Yes?
No.
I even learned that the African brain is lighter in weight than the European brain. We know this to be true. Yes?
Nope.
Does science change or stay the same?
Changes.
If you wish to read a book that I wrote, please buy it. I'm in a bit of debt. It's called Notes on the State of Virginia. And in chapter 14 on Notes on the State of Virginia is a chapter called Laws, which might seem strange to talk of this subject in law, but I'm speaking of natural law when I write that chapter. And in that chapter, I speak of the distinction between the races and species. And at the end of that thing, delineating the difference of species, of race, I say so much for these trifles, for these interminglings of blood. Aren't we better off for it? So I might suspect that I would have I would be floored, in fact, by the fact that you are indeed a woman of color standing here before me, interviewing me. But I would also have, I believe, I hope, an understanding that man might progress as science does. And I hope that I might stand here in 250 years and say, good job.
Thank you, sir. I think, though, that you may have progressed even in your time in terms of a Black woman.
You mean Phyllis Wheatley?
No.
Oh, you mean
But
a different...
she counts too.
You mean Sally Hemings? Do you wish to delve in? Is that a follow-up question?
I tell you what, I want to hear from the other presidents first, and
Very
then we'll
good.
come back to that.
It was just about to get good.
I know. We were going to dim the lights further.
Well, Mr. Madison, what gives you more consternation? The fact that I am black or a woman? Or do you get a twofer, as you used to be in our time, sometimes when they were looking at affirmative action, they called it, where you could have a woman and a black person in the same person, and that filled 2 slots as they were trying to integrate.
Madam, that comment causes more consternation than your original query.
It causes consternation for me, too.
I suffer no consternation for the fact that you are a woman. I have surrounded myself over the course of my life and have benefited from the example of intelligent women. And the capacity for the female mind for studies of the highest order cannot be questioned. And upon that preface, the notion that we must operate in separate spheres, the male in public, the female in private, is a mere notion of our time that perhaps over time will change. Nor do I find great consternation regarding the color of your skin. I have in private moments entertained people of color at my table, while simultaneously people of color have waited upon them. The mere condition of property or free separating them. But we sit upon a public forum, and therein lies the consternation, madam. Consternation not upon our interaction, but how the public will react to it, for this reason. In 1791, Thomas and I found ourselves upon a buddy road trip, traveling to Lake George for various reasons, to examine the habits of the Hessian fly, to take in the nature, and to found America's first rival political party. Now it was upon the journey back that we too, fatigued, tired from the long journey in Mr. Jefferson's phaeton, sought to seek respite in a tavern. There are taverns scattered and peppered throughout America. The best way to understand one's country is through travel. And we stopped at a particular tavern owned by a particular woman, a free woman of color. She was proud of the tavern that she kept, proud to be hosting such august company, Secretary of State, the greatest congressman in Congress. This particular tavern keeper equally informed us that just the previous week, she had at her tavern hosted none other than President Washington. A proud woman. It was then she informed us that once the people of her community learned that President Washington had chosen her tavern over some of the taverns operated by whites, they had gathered and burned all of her outbuildings to the ground. Where is my consternation, madam? Is it affixed upon the people? A people who may smile and accept it, yet simultaneously wonder, why her? Is it her place to interview we 3 great men? Ought she be somewhere else? To that I will say, madam, you are precisely where you belong. There is a man who has been in my care for some years, a Master Paul Jennings, a young man, personal valet of mine. And were I to look into the future, beyond the scope of all 3 of our deaths, Mr. Jennings should do a great service to posterity by a memoir that he will leave behind. He will speak of his recollections regarding myself. It shall be in those recollections that posterity will know my last words, whatever they'll be, and I hope they'll be good. He shall leave a legacy. Now make no mistake, we are remembered well for the legacy that we left behind, the stacks and stacks of paper, because people in our time thought us worth remembering, and in that posterity thinks us worth remembering. And yet in every instance, make no mistake, any who live, any who have the miracle of breath are worth remembering regardless of whether there are stacks of paper. The annals of history are filled with stories that are untold. Upon that, madam, I should say boldly that the history of America is a history of us. And I should say boldly that your place is here, and I am honored to be questioned by you.
And I appreciate that, but I'm a little confused, because if my place is here, then why were you the president of the American Colonization Society, which was to send me, my ancestors, away?
A very good question, and one that I will provide context for. In the turn of the 18th, I beg your pardon, you are confusing me heartily with these dates. There was a society that was founded regarding just that, the American Colonization Society. Now, there are individuals in my time who speak out regarding the barbarous institution of slavery and yet will be silent upon the racial prejudice that justifies it. People who will call for the end of the institution while simultaneously acknowledging the supremacy of one race over another. You see, there are two quandaries that exist in the scope of that. What is America's stance upon slavery, and what is America's stance upon white and black? It is a question that will be echoed through time. What came first, the institution of slavery or the racial prejudice that has been synonymous with it? Now, we have seen through these various states subsequent decisions as to what the future of slavery should be. In the 1780s, Pennsylvania put forward a law of gradual manumission to see an end to that institution. Virginia, over the course of time, did similar, but with a caveat. Any individual in bondage who was freed had 6 months to vacate the Commonwealth of Virginia, and with that, for many, leaving the only home they had ever known. So what then do we do with these individuals who have been manumitted from bondage? There is a sentiment, one that which I hold, a sentiment that these two races cannot live together peacefully. Now, some put forward the notion that the black, inevitably angry for their holding in bondage, will seek revenge against the white. That is not my sentiment. My sentiment is that these people should never be free and safe over the course of that. Now, this is the motivation behind it. The solution put forward, a colony in Africa, a nation set up, Liberia, the capital of which, Monrovia, named, of course, for James Monroe, a Virginian president who is, by the grace of God, not present tonight. Now, I should serve as president of that because it is a matter that I believe in. And while I suspect posterity will criticize this strange solution that seems to make the most sense in my time, it is something I will participate in. There is a secretary, both Mr. Jefferson and I have acquaintance in, Mr. Edward Coles, who will encourage both of us to take some action over the course of our life to see that we manumit those individuals prescribed to our name. He should say to me to not let it be a blot on an otherwise spotless reputation. It is an action that I will endeavor to take in my will, and it will not be done over the course of that. That, madam, is inevitably why I will participate in that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Washington, what causes you the consternation?
I fear the remarks of Mr. Madison caused me greater consternation than your presence, ma'am.
It would not be the first time I have caused him consternation.
I have long hoped that this practice of holding Negro bondsmen were coming to a natural end. And so it disturbs me greatly to see that at the time of his presidency, that still has not occurred. As Mr. Madison said earlier, just like these other two men, I inherited people. I've gone further than that. I've purchased and sold people in my youth. But I've also changed. Just as Mr. Jefferson says that our government should, so should a man. We are put here for no other purpose, in my opinion, that we learn to improve upon ourselves, that we learn to guide ourselves not by our unnatural passions, but rather by reason and conscience. And I've enjoyed circumstances entirely different than these two men. I fought at the head of an army for 8 years, made up of men not just from Virginia or from the American South, but from all 13 of our states united together. And I will go a step further than that. I served in command of Negro soldiers, free blacks, and in some cases slaves, who were enlisted in the army with the understanding that they would be freed. while I served as a soldier, I also had the honor of a poem written in my honor, sent to me by a young woman in Massachusetts, filled with ancient and symbolism and references, far more than I could have achieved with my limited education. In fact, I was so pleased and impressed by this poem that it was my intention to print it in the newspapers. And I wrote to the authoress list and told her. I had begun by apologizing that I had been so tardy in responding. It had been several weeks. I told her that I had intended to print it in the newspaper and that I'd only stayed my hand, because how could I, in any humility, print a poem honoring me? And because the poem was not my property. And yet the authoress in question, already mentioned by Mr. Jefferson, Phyllis Wheatley, was herself property. A woman in much your circumstances, a woman and of your color. The fact that you question me and interview me as a woman is nothing new. I am a married man. But I have also surrounded myself in my second term by many of those very interesting, educated women of those blue stocking salons. You know, when I was young, I knew very few women who ever were interested or spoke of politics. I remember the first time I ever heard a woman even suppose that the franchise should be extended unto them. I'd heard it only from one woman, a woman who by coincidence shares your name, Hannah Lee. She is the sister of the famous Lee brothers. There's 6 of them, all of them engaged in government, so it's to be expected, I suppose. But by the time I was president, it had become a matter of debate. And more women were engaging themselves within this discourse. And well, it should be. For if the men of the United States are the freest men on earth, then does it not go hand in hand that the women must be the freest as well? As to the more dangerous circumstance, and I say dangerous for very much the reasons that were mentioned earlier by Mr. Madison. We nearly did not see our Constitution, we're going to say ratified, we nearly didn't even see it writ because of the increasing issue of the practice of Negro bondsmanship. A number of states have taken action towards ending the practice in their borders. They have not done so all with equal order and regularity. Mr. Madison has already spoken of the so-called Gradual Manumission Act of Pennsylvania. Very much of the opinion that the greatest threat facing our nation is this division. And so my consternation is that it has not improved itself by Mr. Madison's day. I have purposely avoided speaking on this subject throughout my life, so as not to endanger the success of our unity.
Was it not to endanger the success of the unity, or was it cowardice for not standing up for what was right?
I will tell you this, Mom, in answer to your question, which I think it does, is that I've come to the conclusion, even more certain of it now, from what Mr. Madison says of his day and what you represent standing here now before us in, what did you say,
2022, yes.
The fact I have taken no public action in my life is the only unavoidable subject of regret in my life. It is my hope to take the action that was mentioned by Mr. Madison of freeing my people. It is my intention to free one of them immediately. Most will be freed upon my wife's death. But there is a man who has shown me loyal service throughout his service to me as a valet and then for 8 years of war. And he also shares your name, William Lee. Do you cause me consternation, Mom? If you have any relation to William Lee, then I am honored to be questioned by you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I have a question for you, gentlemen. Would you be shocked, or what are your thoughts that way after you all passed away, we've actually elected a Black male president, and we currently have a Black and Asian female vice president. Could you have imagined, Mr. Jefferson?
You wish me to go first?
Yes, I do.
I think she only addressed you.
Well, as usual, I shall go, Washington shall not. Would I be surprised? Indeed, yes. I could not have fathomed a time when there might be both a female in public office, equally a Negro. I do hold some allowance in my time for the female to have a right of suffrage, that is a right to vote, but this is only in a time of widowship. If she becomes a widow, then the vote of the estate should not fall away because of change of the head of the estate, but rather fall to her as the widower, and thus her vote becomes her husband's. But a female holding public office, this is quite audacious. I'm known as a progressive in my age, you know.
A little too progressive for you?
Well, look, I wanted everyone to be able to practice whatever religion they wanted. That's fairly progressive. Yes?
True. Yes.
How many Baptists in
Very
the
true.
room? Or Catholic? Or Quaker? Or Hebrew? Mohammedan? No? I wanted equitable education for all in Virginia. That's fairly radical and progressive, yes?
For
Education regardless of sex, yes? Regardless of how much money you make or do not make, yes? Well, that's fairly progressive. Did you say all? Meaning?
I said for all? You want education for all?
You know, I do make allowance, you mean for the Negro? I do make allowance for education for the Negro on two conditions. That is a tax to be applied to people at large. That is one of these taxes to be applied for the education of the Negro, the slave, because they have none. The second is to be applied to their proper amalgamation of property. They have no property. You know, I say that freeing our slaves with the stroke of one pen is nothing more than freeing babes into the wilderness. And if you have any understanding of what it means to be responsible for those who are underneath you, then if you have any children, or you might understand that those underneath you could need some legs, some help, some offerance of your own to be gifted to live their own life, then you might equally understand that these people who have been held in lifelong bondage, they have nothing. So what is our obligation to them but to give them something? Yes? Yes. What's the name you have for this?
You speak of reparation?
What's that word?
Reparations?
Say it again.
Reparations.
Say it loudly.
Reparations.
And what does that mean but something that must be given to a people who have been abused and oppressed and held in lifelong subjugation? What is this that I have proposed but that? Yes, a tax placed upon you, me, myself, white people who held these people in lifelong subjugation to give them property, to give them education. They have none. This is a man-made problem, slavery. Which means who can fix it? So whose responsibility is it to fix it? Or we can just say, kick the thing down the road for the next generation, right? Congratulations, children. Look what you inherited. Yes? I know what it means to inherit slavery. I inherited my slaves. I inherited 200 plus people when I was 14 years of age. When I was 3 years old, I began to recognize my manservant, who was not my manservant at the time. His name was Jupiter, and I thought he was my friend. It took us until we were 7 years old until we realized that when I made a request to him to go get a toy from the main house, that it was not a request. Can you imagine yourself in that situation? How old must you be to realize that this request from someone else is not a request? This person is not your friend. They're not asking something from you. They're demanding something. And how old must you be to realize that I cannot ask something of you. I can only demand something of you because I own you. So if this is a man-made problem, if we inherited this, then it's our job to fix it. So I don't know. I apply 2 taxes to the people at large, and I hope to dig ourselves out of this thing. And I don't know. I suppose it will work, but at the end of the day, we must have people to vote upon this thing in some majority, critical mass, 51%, to move the state of the nation and the state of their individual laws, to allow for the passing of legislation, to allow for the ending and mitigation of this institution.
Mr. Washington and Mr. Madison, any comments you all want to make on the fact that, yes, ultimately, Black people have taken office, and the highest office in the land?
Is it the responsibility of government to progress? Is it? I disagree. The end of government is to provide the opinion of safety, of order. If we're to accept the ancient axiom of commonwealth, government is the good of all. We give up some so that all might be protected. And in that end, it is not a government's responsibility to see that society is coerced into progress, but rather the latter. It's the responsibility of society to coerce a government into progress. Will you allow me some license to speak about after I die?
If you can predict into the future what happened after you died?
Well, it's pure arithmetic of examining hypotheticals. After I die, my beloved wife shall be remembered well by those who remembered me in life. She shall find a new vivacity in the federal city and should even be honored with an honorary seat in Congress. A novelty, a female congressman, honorary. She could oversee the proceedings, she could weigh in, she just couldn't vote. Now, upon one famous occasion, she should arrive 30 minutes late and will remark in proper fashion, "Gentlemen, you'll have to start over, I wasn't here." And they will. But in that, we find something fascinating. Rules and norms are broken when something else begins to make more sense. And then new rules are made. And is that not the American character? Is that not the Declaration of Independence in different semantics? And upon that, is it not the obligation of those living for those who will come after to pursue the ends that make the greater sense, regardless of the rules, and then from that, having broken those rules, to make greater rules? So should it surprise me?
Not at all.
No.
Mr. Washington, and then we're going to take some questions from the audience.
You put the question to me, so I will begin by stating that unlike Mr. Jefferson, who is a great thinker and a great dreamer, I am more pragmatic. And it has been my experience that we are born into a hierarchy. And it is a limiting hierarchy. But it does create certain advantages and disadvantages, which will often be very difficult if ever broken. But I've always been supportive of a meritorious society. I've always considered it difficult to remove oneself from the station they were birthed, but if one has the means, the ability, the skills, they should be able to do it. It's one of the difficulties we face under the previous systems of government back in the halcyon days of old when we were colonies. So, it should be possible. But I put a question to you. What does it matter what our opinion is? In 2022, we will long be gone. Mr. Jefferson mentioned, not tonight, but he has, that the government doesn't belong to those of us who created it. A man cannot wear at 50 years of age the same breeches he wore at 15. What matters, man, is to the people and citizens of 2022. Does it please them? If it meets with their approbation, it meets with mine.
Fantastic. It meets with some, and with some it doesn't. But let's go to our audience who has a question. And I can barely see. Do we have a question? If not, we have one. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm working. I got to get to the other side.
Wait, no, I think the question was over there.
You are a cruel man, Jimmy.
Only you. Somebody did have their hand raised.
Good day, gentlemen. From each of you having different perspectives from your administrations, can you briefly give us, each one of you, insights into your thought processes on the important decisions you had to make in your administrations? Like how you came to them, how you broke down those thought processes.
Could you repeat that one more time?
I'm sorry.
Because it was very difficult to hear you.
I apologize. Basically, if you can break down the process that you each in your administrations on your important decisions, how you came to those decisions, each step, or briefly the decisions that you had to make, can you break down the thought process that you had to take and undertake to make those type decisions?
Well, I'll start with you, Mr. Washington.
I mentioned earlier that I suffer a deficiency of education. I have always surrounded myself by a council of war. Ever since the second time I was engaged under arms, back again when the French were our enemy and the British our friends. It was no different as president. I made full use of my cabinet of secretaries. In fact, the term cabinet is my own. Mr. Jefferson will recall that it wasn't my usual custom to come to him when I had a question for a matter of state, or to go to Mr. Hamilton when I had a question of a matter of treasury, or Mr. Knox on an occasion of a question of war, though I knew as much about it as he did. But rather, we would all gather together, and we would discuss the matter together. It wasn't some mistake that Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Jefferson sat upon my council. I didn't mean to surround myself with men that would agree with my every opinion. What use of that ever is for a gentleman for his opinions, if all they do is agree with the opinion you've always come to? What I wanted was the disagreement. I wanted the men to convince me whether I was wrong or right. So we reached most of our agreements as a committee. I had the final decision, of course. That was my responsibility. And the weight of an error falls upon me as well. But I relied on the wise counsel of those around me.
Mr. Jefferson?
I thank the gentleman from the state of Virginia. Oh. From the county of?
Oh,
Say again?
neighbor.
Princess Anne County.
Princess Anne. I thought you said from the same county. Albemarle? I provided for myself an allowance of statistic, strangely enough. My words are, I'm somewhat a romantic. My words tend to betray my heart, and yet my mind tends to take the forefront in meetings of state. It's commonly said that I would say not a word with my arms crossed and listen, much as my predecessor and mentor, General Washington, engaged in listening. So most of the time I would listen to Hamilton and just disagree and choose the other side. But in my presidency, I found myself relying a great deal upon statistic. And most importantly, this phrase, that is what is most agreeable to the largest portion of our number. That is the majority. What might increase the greatest amount of happiness amongst the greatest number of our people? I know no better way to proceed in this new government, wherein that is the object, in a republic that utilizes democracy, to give the greatest amount of happiness to the greatest number of our people. Well, then, so say we. And if you wish to change that majority, then change the majority. But until then, I shall submit myself to that majority and attempt to alter my decisions as the majority sees fit, while maintaining security, peace, and happiness, including doubling the size of the country at a few cents an acre. That's a pretty good deal. But aside from that, yes.
Mr. Madison.
By the time of my administration, America was changing. America is always changing. The gentlemen who espoused in their youth the children of revolution every day became hard of hearing and gray of hair. A new generation was rising, endeavoring to acquaint themselves with their America. Upon that, I had not the benefit of a great cabinet. I had 2 vice presidents die in office, and my Secretary of State was wholly inefficient, so inefficient, in fact, that I adopted the practice of writing his letters for him, saying what the president would or would not do, and then greeting them as the president. But the position that I inherited was a difficult one. Our continent of North America saw the constant endeavoring of intermeddling betwixt England, France, and Spain, who still held territories at that time. Our sailors abroad were treated with disrespect and animosity towards by the British Lion. Now, my worthy friend speaks, of course, of that Louisiana Purchase, but it was not so far away prior to that threat against war with France was inevitable. And so by the time of my administration, it seemed for the Federalists that war with France would soon take place, and for the Democratic Republicans, war with England. Now, when faced with that, a war, inevitably, what decision do you reach? You reach the one, inevitably, that sticks to the American principle we endeavor to put forward. But war is ever a difficult thing. War means deficit. War means loss, not only of life, but of very possibly one's value. I put forward the Constitution of the United States. I swore in my oath to defend it. I am no soldier, unlike His Excellency. The most violent thing I've ever done is sneeze. But I should say, in summation of what my presidency should be, it should be to defend that Constitution, to see it through that great crucible of war, but equally to see the changing of hands. America passing from our generation to another generation. When I arrived at the presidential manor, I did so by carriage. When I left, I did so by steam engine. And if that is not a perfect summation of the changing of the world, I do not know what is.
Gentlemen, in 2022, we have something that is called social media.
What?
It's called social media. And it allows us instantaneous connection with people all around the world. As a matter of fact, there are people all around the world listening to you right now through social media. We have a question from one of those people in the audience. I know it's hard to understand. You actually use, this is called a smartphone. And you can actually write in your question through this little device. And then I get to read it on this bigger device. I know, you have no clue. But let me ask you the question that someone from social media has given. And this is specifically for you, Mr. Washington. What say you, sir, on the affairs of a future government suppressing our freedoms in the name of keeping us safe?
That doesn't give a great deal of detail to suffice answer the question, Mom.
All I can do is read the question.
Quite so. I wonder if it means what it really suggests. The difficulty always has to be asked when you view of any matter of politics, what is the truth behind the situation? Earlier there was a mention of Daniel Shay's rebellion. This was a circumstance just before we met in convention to create our new system of government, one of the reasons why I argued we must do so. When men in Western Massachusetts raised an armed rebellion against taxes that had been put into effect by their own representatives in their own legislature in Massachusetts. Now, if somebody had come to me back in '83 when I resigned my commission, and if they had asked me on that occasion, if they had said that there would be in the near future an armed rebellion against taxes and government created by our own representatives, by our own elected representatives, I would have thought that that man was a suitable tenant of a madhouse. And yet there we were. Why was that disorder allowed to continue so long? Why was it so allowed to cause such civil unrest? Was this some dissension? Does it speak to some lack of morality amongst these people? Or was it some British policy disseminated by Tories? Or did these men have valid grievances in want of redress? If they did have valid grievances, why were they not answered? And if they were not valid grievances, then why was the disorder allowed to so continue? Why was the matter not put down? If your government wants the spirit and energy to quell such disorder, then what protection has a man for life or liberty? I made that argument in order to see our Constitution ratified. So imagine my embarrassment when in '93 I found myself facing almost exactly the same circumstance. A number of men in a number of our western portions of our states, particularly in western Pennsylvania, raised up in armed rebellion, attacked their courthouses because they didn't agree with a tax that was placed by their representatives, their elected representatives in Congress. At any time when you allow the minority to force its will upon the majority, then you have put an end to a republic. And how could I allow this disorder to continue if the very reason that I gave for the failure of the Articles of Confederation were now to be applied to the Constitution? I raised an army of 1,000 men and marched at its head to put down those 300 whiskey rebels. And we did so. When they knew I were coming, they laid down their arms. No blood was shed. And then we sought to see their grievances answered by legal means, by the very means that were mentioned by Mr. Madison earlier. We have means for revolution. We need not raise arms. The means for revolution is within the Constitution itself.
Mr. Madison, there's a specific question to you, sir. And that is, you wrote in what was referred to as the Federalist Papers that we have a right to own cannons. Can you fathom a president saying that we can't own a cannon or a certain type of firearm?
Fascinating. So let's speak to the nature of liberty, of what it means, building upon what President Washington said. If we're to accept that in nature, to have absolute freedom is to have no safety, and that, of course, is freedom. Guarantee of all of these rights, but no safety in the course of it. If we're to accept the opposite, that complete safety with no freedom is tyranny, how then do we find the middle ground? We might say that the foundation of the American experiment are fixed upon the rights of human nature, but what does it mean? What are these rights of human nature? What is a natural right? To that we may look to the treatises of John Locke, natural liberty being, of course, life, liberty, and what else? No, don't listen to him, property. These three natural rights that come from nature and therefore cannot be infringed upon by any government. your ability to think, your right to breathe, your ability to acquire those subsequent things necessary for your survival and your happiness. These are natural rights. These are what you are given by the sheer merit of your existence. However, this is nature, absent from government. The only law that exists in nature, the only suggestion is that everyone must get along always, no matter what, ad infinitum, so there. We have all evidence that that does not function. Gentleman cites, or woman, I know not what this phantom in your box is. I wrote in those self-sown papers, if men were angels, no system of government would be necessary. What is government if not the purest reflection of human nature? And so the end of society is to take these three natural rights, to recognize that completely free and alone we will never be safe. We will come together and we will restrict that within the realm of civic rights, rights that are man-made to better govern the order of man. So, man's right to life, is this natural or civic? Natural. Man's right to liberty, natural or civic?
Natural.
Man's right to property, natural or civic? Man's right to trial by jury, natural or civic?
Civic.
Man's right to religion, natural or civic?
Natural.
Fooled some of you. Man's right to keep and bear arms, natural or civic? Civic. Now, what natural right does this come from? The right to self-preservation, to protect that which one possesses and to protect one's self. Now, if we accept this, if we accept that in our time, most specifically, the militia is a responsibility and duty of every man between the age of 16 and 60, then an investment in that defense is essential upon the practice of that. The question is not, can a man own a cannon, or ought a man own a cannon, but what is the responsibility of the man behind the fuse? For make no mistake, Americans may speak boldly of the liberties they possess, but you must simultaneously speak boldly of the obligation that is coupled with them. Because freedom without obligation is self-interest.
Gentlemen, if I could ask you, if you can keep it short, we can try to get one more question in from our audience here so that we can stay on time. Is there one final question from the audience?
Testing? Okay, cool. So I think this is actually a really cool question to end on. I want to hear from all three of you really quick. So we've talked a lot about how, obviously you were all Virginia planters. You all owned slaves, but none of you freed your slaves during your lifetime. I'm curious, so generations after your time, to your point, Mr. Madison, the biggest thing that keeps you up at night is slavery. What's going to happen with that institution? If there was a war today in your time saying you will have to preserve the Union and lose your slaves or keep your slaves, which side would you choose?
Were you asking in a particular order or? Any order. I've already answered that, not tonight, but I've mentioned it. Well, you won't know this because, as I said, I've kept these matters to myself and to my friends. If such a thing were to occur in my lifetime, sir, I wouldn't side with the South. You seem to be under a mistake that you think I wish to preserve the property I have. If I could find a means by which I could rid myself of it that would somehow better their circumstances, if I could afford to do so, I would. In fact, I've endeavored to purchase the slaves of my wife's estate that I might free them as well, which is presently denied me by law. I have been spending years trying to find out how to remove myself from this particular species of property. Truth is, it's costing me a great deal of money. Back when I grew tobacco, it was an advantage. But I grow wheat. I also mentioned earlier when I first begun that I have in the past purchased and sell Negro flesh, but I no longer will do so because it separates married couples and families. So the truth is now I have far more people than I can afford, and it is injuring my estate.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Jefferson?
I believe the answer is in my writing again and again and again, in the bills that I have proposed, in my legislation, in my Virginia Constitution, in the Northwest Ordinances. My proposals to end and mitigate slavery have no asterisk that says, except for Thomas Jefferson. It does not say end slavery by 1800 in Virginia, except for Thomas Jefferson. It does not say make the slave trade illegal in 1777, except for Thomas Jefferson. It does not say all men are, in my declaration, all men are created equal, and then a large paragraph about an anti-slavery clause, except for Thomas Jefferson. I place no asterisk therein because it is precisely against my understanding, my philosophic understanding of the natural right of mankind. We don't see those rights represented in law, but this is our job, is to present law that might meet philosophy. So honestly, I have no doubt of what side I would stand on if there were to be an uncivil war upon this issue. And if I could be so bold as to look into the future, there might be some future president very happily on the righteous side of equality and equity and ending the slave trade. And he might quote Thomas Jefferson more than any of the prior president, hypothetically.
Mr. Madison?
The preservation of the Union is my answer.
So, gentlemen, we're down to the last question for the evening. I know time flies when you're dead.
Thanks for that reminder.
I have to be back in my casket by 8:30.
He turns into a pumpkin.
Exactly. You don't want to see it.
So here's the question for each of you. What advice do you have for us today in 2022 to keep democracy alive and thriving? How do we get our civility back? And let me start with you, Mr. Madison, and we'll work our way up.
My answer to the worthy gentleman was brief, primarily because of this. I shall leave behind advice to my country to be opened after my descent into the tomb, reflecting upon an America that every day seems to be dividing itself, particularly upon those issues that man cannot compromise upon. I should say that the advice nearest to my heart and deepest in my convictions is that this union of the states be cherished and perpetuated.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Jefferson, your advice to us.
On how we gain our civility again.
How do we get our civility back? How do we keep this democracy going?
Oh, well, those are perhaps two different questions. I suppose the civility would be to see each other as human. This idea that we stand across the aisle from someone and that they are wrong simply because they are Federalist or they're a Republican. They're an R or a D or a blue or a purple, or we entrench ourselves and we choose to deny their humanity because of their viewpoint upon the splitting of a hair. We choose to dehumanize in that moment. And so I would hope that we might proffer some greater sense of debating not the man in front of us, but the ideas between us. And if we do that, then something very strange happens. And I've done it once with Henry. We had a glass of wine after. It was lovely. That's that we could maintain our humanity and humility. We could see the man across from us. I know that debate is difficult. I know that distinctions amongst our number are deep and divisive and sometimes dehumanizing, and I know that there are some amongst our number who wish to dehumanize us. But if we can find something within us to remove our ego from the conversation and place the conversation between us, then we might be one step closer to grasping their hand. And if we can do that, then we might just outlast the Romans. Ooh, and wouldn't that be nice? I want to outlast the Romans. Now, as per the democracy, how can we maintain this portion of democracy? I don't know, I'm dead, good luck.
Mr. Washington.
Well, I would wish good luck on the first portion. I wish I were better at causing civility. Maybe I wouldn't have lost some of my best cabinet members. I am personally a student of Seneca. We've heard the words of more recent philosophers, but I prefer the Stoics. And one of the things that we're taught by Stoics is try to curb our passion, which is never useful in an argument and only matters to muddy the debate and stop success from being made. When I was president, Mr. Jefferson argued that I were forgetting the farmer and that I was no longer a Virginian. He's right, because I had been given a view that no other man had by serving as general of the Continental Army. I was no longer a Virginian. I was an American. And it's time that we learn to embrace that matter. As I said earlier, to step away from those matters that separate us, that hold us as separate and distinct from one another, and instead learn to embrace those matters that bind us together as one. How do we preserve the democracy of our republic? That is your responsibility. You have a severe responsibility placed on your shoulders. You do not have the luxury to be a spectator. You are required to be a participant. The Republic relies upon it. And I charge you to do so. I believe you can do so. The Director of all things has carried us through many diverse and bloody scenes. And it has not done so with the intention to now see its work left unfinished, but to rely alone on providence without exerting ourselves to the utmost. That will serve to do nothing more than to tempt providence. I believe that we are to be viewed as players on a most conspicuous of stages, one that seems destined by providence for displays of human greatness and felicity. But as we are told by Addison in his play Cato, we cannot command success. Only the immortals can do that. But we can do something more important. We can attempt to be worthy of success. I charge you to continue to put your spirits and your fortitudes to the greatest of tests, that we might prove worthy.
Ladies and gentlemen, Presidents Washington, Jefferson, and Madison.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Barbara Hamm Lee.
Thank you. Thank you. There we go.